Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin chapter 1 of Tribulation Force. The last book was absolutely terrible, but this one is even worse. I will end up calling it Childish Force most of the time because the adult characters act like nothing more than children the entire book. The plots are childish and sickening to read. If someone actually makes it to the end, that is very surprising considering how nauseating it is to read this drivel. The book begins after an introduction explaining the events of the last book. The intro was better than the actual book as more about the raptures was explained and the summaries of the main characters was more informative than actually reading the last book. Chapter 1 opens with Rayford sitting in the cockpit of the plane he is flying. He takes out his Bible and begins reading during his free time. He reflects on how funny it is that he is doing this when in the past he would read other items. He then asks his co-worker if it is okay for him to read the Bible. This is a weak attempt at trying to start a religious conversation, but it comes off as Rayford needing to ask permission. If what he was doing was so right, then why does he need to beg permission to do it? So his co-pilot Nick makes it very clear that he doesn't care what Rayford does as long as he doesn't try to push his beliefs on him. Rayford makes a stupid comment that if he didn't try then Nick would not respect him, and Nick puts him in his place by telling him how wrong he is. Rayford stops his Bible reading as he sees a newspaper that rehashes the story of Nikolai killing his former friends. Everyone was brainwashed at that meeting, except Buck, and they believe a false narrative Nikolai told them. Because Buck can no longer be mind-controlled by Nikolai, he used his mind control powers to make everyone think Buck had never shown up to the meeting. The only difference is that at the end of the last book everyone instantly believed Buck's story, while in chapter 1 Rayford confronts Buck by being skeptical for some reason. Odd, since skeptical is not a word to describe Rayford, but gullible is more appropriate. Scene changes to Buck as he adapts to living in Chicago. He was sent here as punishment for missing the meeting. Even though it seems to be a blessing because now he can attend the church and be with Chloe. His true motives show when he thinks to himself that he's only interested in Chloe and not so much the church. He wants to visit her but doesn't want to seem too eager for some stupid reason that makes no sense. If he's in love with her, then not seeming too eager would not matter unless he was a 13-year-old. It gets mentioned that he has to meet his new boss on Monday, but he previously got into a fight with her and talked down to her. Now their places were reversed and he fears reprisal. He finally decided to go in to check in, and he ignored the stares of the workers, and he was sure their story of his demotion was known. His new boss Verna is moving into her new office. He clears his voice to announce his presence and Verna turns to address him. She shows that she is a no-nonsense boss and cuts him no slack. Buck tries throwing around his weight and she puts him in his place. She tells him he cannot show up unannounced and has to make appointments to see her. He is led out of the office and told to sit and wait until her schedule is clear. Buck makes a snarky comment about being forced to wait in the principal's office. Buck thinks of Verna as a wannabe boss that can't write her way out of a paper bag. Funny how projection works, because Buck can't write anything until he is told what to write word for word by someone else. Scene changes to Rayford as he walks through the airport having one of his mood swings. We get told he has been having those since he converted. It makes sense because he, like many Christians, need others to validate their beliefs by agreeing with him. If you don't, it upsets them because it proves how gullible they are. We get told that now that Chloe had converted, that he and his daughter had become friends. This goes on to show how little love he has for his daughter. His only real interest is in puffing up his own feelings. We get told that Bruce is having an emergency meeting of the Childish Force and Bruce had been unable to reach Rayford. Rayford calls Buck and tells him about the meeting. Scene changes to Buck meeting with Verna. Verna gives him a speech that he is only covering local stories and she will assign him as she sees fit. Buck refuses to comply and demands that the big boss gets on the phone. Scene changes to Rayford. His boss calls him and tells him he needs to stop preaching his religion on the job. Rayford protests, saying that he'll think about it. His boss warns that he could lose his job and Rayford again protests and he'll think about it. He seems to think it's his right to force his religion onto others. Would he be as accepting if someone else forced their religion on him? Scene switches back to Buck as Verna agrees to call the boss, but she wants to speak to him in private first. The boss tells her that Buck can basically do what he wants and he follows his own rules. She protests, but the boss threatens to fire her. Scene changes back to Rayford and he meets with Bruce. He tells about the trouble at work and Bruce is unsympathetic and even jokes about it. What can you expect from an impotent pastor? This chapter basically throws a bunch of drama at you to set the stage for the childishness that follows. The whole Buck situation is ridiculous because no one would let it play out the way it did. This just shows that the authors are divorced from reality. It's no wonder that they believe their invisible imaginary friend exists. This ends this chapter. See you next time for Chapter 2 of Childish Force.